Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. I'm back taking the rest of my look through Anvil magazine number 4. And I still haven't really had a chance to work out this camera, so we're just going to kind of suffer through what we got. There's not nearly as many visuals to look at in this particular issue, especially when you compare it to the comic we were discussing in the previous video. So hopefully this will be a better viewing experience than that was. Anvil number 4 has a lot of different stuff in it. I don't know as this is the most variety we've seen so far, but there's certainly a lot of different flavors in here. And I really just want to go through story by story. And as is my usual one, I'm more interested in offering a little feedback to most of the authors and giving my general impressions on each story than I am a detailed analysis of what really works and what really doesn't. Like I said, I tried to just do that for one piece, the piece I think the most about in each volume. If I were to do the whole volume, I'd be here for months. And, you know, there are a lot of other topics that I wish to cover. So, the production team here is Richard Wilson as the managing editor, his wife Devaney, I think it's pronounced Devaney, is the senior editor, and graphic design by the ever-reliable Jacob Calta. Our artists doing incidental arts for the stories are Kevin John Jacob, Delta Magna, Marcos Rios, Natan Melendez, and Joe San. And I was really impressed with the work of Joe San and Delta Magna in this particular volume. Really, really great art that serves to elevate select moments in certain stories. So, our stories in this edition are Night of the Prowlers by Joshua M. Gonzalez. And this is the second time Mr. Gonzalez has been published in Anvil magazine. He previously published Thief of Perun, and this kind of follows along that story, while the previous story was more about tracking and dealing with a bandit. This particular story, Night of the Prowlers, is about a theft gone wrong. So our hero Lamb, he goes out and he tries to do a job. Unfortunately, he accidentally kills someone, and there's a lot of fallout from that. Thieves tend to rob wealthy people. Wealthy people tend to deal with those that cause deaths on their property pretty harshly. That goes double when the person is the wealthy man's son. So Lamb has a lot of problems that come up from this. I really like the pacing of this story. We are introduced to an expert hunter who is hired by the man Lamb robs to try and hunt him down and bring him to justice. I like the introduction of the hunter. I like the build up to their confrontation, and I like most of the confrontation itself. In particular, the build up. I forget what the hunter's name is. Let me refresh my memory here real quick. But yes, our hunter is introduced in this sequence where he is hunting a interesting like serpentine beast that has been terrorizing the countryside. We get a good sense for him. He really enjoys the hunt. Indra is his name. Indra enjoys the hunt. He has a certain amount of integrity. He is doing what he's doing to make the world a better place. And it's kind of disappointing ultimately that Lamb has to fight him to the death as well. I found the actual fight to be pretty engaging, but the ending was a little bit disappointing. Not simply because Indra died. I think Indra could have been a really strong recurring antagonist for Lamb. And if you're going to do like a long running series of short stories about a single character, it can be helpful to have a recurring antagonist because you don't need to build animosity between the characters every time. But well, Indra winds up dead, and that's the way it is. The big thing is, like, for me, I would have preferred um, a little more cunning and tactics on Lamb's part to contrast the physical superiority that Indra has over him. One of the really interesting things is when you have this little scrabby guy who outthinks his big muscular and perhaps more skilled opponent. But that wasn't the outcome we got. It's still okay. I'm not really a big fan of like an instinctive fighter as a trope in fiction, largely because it belies all of my experience with fighting in real life, martial arts, and training and dealing with an actual fight. There's a certain distance instinct can take you, but generally a well regimented fighter. One of the things that makes you a master fighter is that you can beat people who just have a knack for it. If you read some of the European sword manuals, like they say, you're a sword master when you can beat up, three brave men in a row, and by that they mean people with a knack for fighting, but who aren't extremely well trained. And also, you can beat three drunk people. That was another requirement. Anyways, it is a fantasy thing, so I can kind of forgive that. It's just not my fantasy, and it made that particular payoff not quite as satisfying for me as another one might have been. But that's more to do with my taste as an audience than anything else. Speaking of which, the second story is The Bubble Burst by Sean McKendrick. I really enjoyed most of this story. It is about a slacker who has never really found a reason to do his best, and then he gets caught up in a wild and crazy situation. An alien spaceship is passing by Earth. Their FTL drive distorts time, and a small sliver of this distorted time bubble around their ship passes through Earth. And Kurt, who is our slacker, I believe. Yeah. No, Gene, excuse me. Not Kurt. Gene and Molly are the main couple here. And Gene is caught on the inside of the bubble, while Molly is just outside it. So Gene lives pretty much the rest of his life with this girl, Molly, just outside. And inside the bubble, time moves super fast. So while basically a second of time passes outside the bubble in Molly's world, like thousands of years pass inside the bubble. And Gene actually lives and dies, and he leaves behind this legacy of innovation and technology, that all of which he created trying to escape from the bubble so we could see Molly again. It's a really fascinating concept. It's a fun character study, both for Gene and for Molly. My real problem with this is it has what feels like a real cop-out ending at the end of the story. The aliens discover this has all happened, and they have a magic reset button they just press, and there's actually no consequences to anything we read, and that's pretty disappointing to me. I don't like those kind of endings to sci-fi stories. I prefer more you have a sci-fi story where some kind of disaster with technology screws everything up, and people just deal with it, and they're left dealing with it at the end of the story. That would have, again, sat better with me, but, again, that's me as an audience reader. That's what I would have preferred, not what I got. Honestly, if this had a better and more thoughtful ending, this might have been my spotlight story, as opposed to The Helm, but the ending, it kind of killed my desire to continue thinking about the story, because there's no consequences to the story at the end of the day. The Gene and Molly literally wind up back with the relationship they started out with. And I think the story would have been more profound if we could have found something really interesting about the nature of Gene and Molly's relationship as a result of all of this, rather than just resetting it. But, authors create what they want to create. And it's not like this has ever been an uncommon premise in sci-fi, but it's a more modern premise. And I think part of that is the influence, particularly of television, because television does kind of require a status quo to return to at the end of every episode, more for production and budgetary reasons than any necessity of the writing. It's the economics of television that make that ideal. because you can save money on things like sets and cast if it's always the same for every episode. So I understand that if your experience with genre fiction comes primarily through television, that may be part of your lens. I don't know. I just think back to the Twilight Zone, and since every episode of that stood on its own, there was never any issue with just writing whatever crazy idea you had and allowing it to remain at the end of the story. That's I think that's the more engaging and meaningful long term. Because the original Twilight Zone, people talk about almost every episode of that show as a banger. I don't know. The return to status quo, I think, is only meaningful if the status quo is part of the point you're trying to make. Anyway, I like the execution of the story up until the ending. Unfortunately, endings are pretty important to stories, and the ending was quite disappointing. After that, we have The Coldest War by Blaine Lee Pardoe. This is part of his Land and Sea series, which is kind of about a alien invasion where the aliens come up out of the ocean. This is my first exposure to Land and Sea, and this is kind of a prequel, so the aliens aren't actually here, so I don't know what exactly it means that they came out of the ocean. I don't know if they landed there and then they waited and then they came out and attacked Earth at its weakest, or if they've always been there and these are like prehistoric aliens, or if they have interdimensional portals that just happen to open in the ocean. I don't know any of that. What I do know is this was a pretty good action set piece. While I find some of the technology a little bit, eyebrow raising, the sci-fi is pretty hard, and you can follow all of the action very clearly. There's clear consequences to most of it. The descriptions are quite good. I think the dialogue and the behavior of the pilots is quite authentic to a lot of the military history I've read. So enjoyed it a lot. There are a couple of things in here where I wonder if I would understand exactly what is going on better if I had read other parts of the series, mainly in the little details mentioned about the tech. There is a mention, for example, of apparently they have these cartridges which contain some kind of reaction mass or something that creates a big power surge. And they use this to power energy weapons, apparently. Like, we see one used in conjunction with a laser to charge up its capacitors, and again with a railgun. I'm not sure exactly what's going on with those. Again, I think it might make more sense if I had read some of the other material in this universe. But all in all, it's tiny little nitpicky stuff like that really just jumped out at me. It's a good, solid story, and if you like mech action, it's going to satisfy you. And if you're looking for a taste of what like a realistic hard sci-fi mech series might read like, this is a good way to get that. Personally, I played some MechWarrior and I really enjoyed that, but it's been a while since I've had a hankering to get a really great mech series. And I can't say this short story really grabbed me and said, go and read the rest of Land and Sea. But if that is your jam, I think this will interest you. And I'm not saying I didn't like it. I had a pretty good time. It's just not something I'm really looking for more of in my life right now. Black Box by Sean C.W. Korsgaard. And I apologize if I mispronounced that. This is a strange story. It is space explorers find record of alien civilization, and it's kind of creepy and kind of interesting. And that's a fine story. It reads a bit like a creepypasta without a huge amount of the creepy element. So basically you have these space scavengers going through, and salvaging material from this system that aliens used to occupy. No one's ever met the aliens, but there's a lot of their old tech here, and it's valuable both as salvage and as something to reverse engineer. And eventually they find a black box in one of these, and they get a record of a war the aliens fought with a second alien species. Um, it's a decent story if you're into that kind of like sci-fi scenario. If you really enjoyed, for example, the part of Alien where they're poking around the space jockey ship, um, there's a lot of stories out there with that kind of vibe to them. Black Box fits very nicely into the genre. I'm a bit of a sucker for that particular genre. I think this would have worked a little bit better if something that the explorers had discovered in those records had applied to their immediate situation. I think the best stories in this genre have kind of like that parallel storyline where something that happened in the past is going to help them solve a problem in the present. There's a classic episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation where they are caught in essentially an ancient booby trap left over from a interstellar war thousands of years ago, and they find the records of they find a ship caught in the booby trap. They have to go through its records in order to make the way out of the trap themselves. And that is the formulation for these message in a bottle type stories in space that I find the most satisfying. And I would have liked that added element of parallel construction in Black Box, but the idea there is an element where the protagonist is a veteran, and of course so was the person who wrote the Black Box. So that is certainly interesting. And I think if that had been leaned on more, if there had been some kind of resonance between the protagonist and the person who recorded the Black Box, the alien who recorded the Black Box, it may have worked a little bit better as well. But the prose is very good. The alien concepts are tackled with a lot of finesse. It's very difficult to make an alien feel alien without just writing gobbledygook. And I think that Korsgaard really did accomplish that. So there's a lot of good prose there. There's a lot of good storytelling mechanics. I was never lost, even though basically what the protagonist is getting is a telepathic recording of what the storyteller saw and heard and felt. And that requires a certain amount of finesse in the way you tell your story. Korsgaard has that, and I have a lot of respect for that, because that is not an easy skill to develop. As someone who has tried to do that kind of writing and failed a fair amount in the past, and I think gotten much better at it myself, I know it's a lot of work, and Korsgaard has clearly put in that work and succeeded quite well. Homefront by Jamie Faye Torkelson. This is another returning author, and Homefront is a pretty fun story. It is kind of a pastiche of like Leave It to Beaver and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and that told from the perspective of a 1950s housewife. It is charming. Some people might describe Homefront as slow. It definitely takes its time getting to the action of the story, but that is clearly because we are trying to build an understanding of our protagonist, Annie, as a housewife, because she is a 1950s housewife, and she is also kind of like a secret agent on the forefront of fighting these invaders who are body snatching people and replacing them with lookalikes. And I like that a lot of time is put into showing how Annie is both of these things. And that is clearly a major part of what this story is trying to get at. The heroism of being a good mom and the heroism of trying to protect the integrity of your home. Both of these things are vital to understanding who Annie is. The story does a really good job juggling both of them. And, there's a lot of, that kind of charming, slightly cheesy, but very fun spy dialogue that you see in so many of the more tongue-in-cheek Cold War entertainment. Things like Get Smart or The Man from U.N.C.L.E. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Big Man-Eater Owl by Garrick Cook is a pretty simple, straightforward story. It's 3 pages, and it is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Some people go out into the mountains doing some prospecting, and we're not really sure what brought them out there, but they eventually go out, they get a wagon, and they catch this big owl. And they coop it up in the wagon, and they're going to try and sell it to a zoo. And along the way, they get attacked by Indians, and there's conflict, and the owl gets loose, and they just barely survive. It's a very simple creature feature kind of a story. It does what it wants to do. It gets out. I had a fun time because I like cryptids. And while Big Owl is not like the most gripping cryptid, I don't know if it's any worse than the Hide Behinds or the Splinter Cat, neither of which I find particularly imaginative or innovative. And if you put it in a good scenario, which this one is, it has the dark, it has the nighttime, it has the Indians coming in and messing up all your best laid plans. It's perfectly serviceable. And the idea that it leaves behind these pellets that have cougar paws visible in them, that alone is pretty creepy. So I had a good time with it. One note, and this is a bit of a nitpick thing, but lances are they are a specific kind of weapon, and they are meant to be used mounted, but they are meant to absorb the shock of cavalry in full charge. And the Indians did not fight that way because they never invented the stirrup. And you need a stirrup in order to ride someone down with a lance. They use spears and they use javelins, but lance is not really the correct term for the Native American pointy stick weapon. And it's a little thing. It's a little thing. But the more I write and the more I read, the more I realize you do kind of need to be very, very careful when you use a specific word incorrectly. And this is a case where the correct word would have been lance or javelin, but not, or would have been spear or javelin, but not lance. Just a tiny, tiny little detail-y nitpick. The Night of Cold Hunger, Part 1 by MFR, also known as Paladin Dragoon. This was a pretty fun story. Again, Dragoon is a returning author. So once again, we have Sherida and Torshen, a dragon and his rider, or a dragon and his squire, excuse me. And we have this really lovely piece of Joseon art there. And in fact, the only comment I would really have on layout in this is we have that beautiful piece of art which gets a half page, and then we have this kind of dull is probably the best word for it. I just don't find this piece of art as worthy of an entire page, where the previous one I would love to see that on an entire page. And I really questioned the choice to have that particular, the innkeeper with one leg gets a whole page so you can see his face better. Not what I would have gone for, but I guess Jacob really liked it, maybe. The story itself is a part 1, and it does a pretty good job of setting up a lot of characters who manage to fit into archetypes without becoming tropes or caricatures. In particular, Torshen and Sherida are with a military unit, and the leader is a noble, but he's not like an entirely useless noble. He's kind of a useless noble. He's not entirely a useless noble. Like, if you're going to make him a caricature, His orders would all be a little off. He would be a bit cowardly. When the group gets attacked, he would shout some orders and then proceed to do nothing. But the captain instead, he doesn't really anticipate all the right dangers, but he's good at giving orders to his men. And when they are attacked, we actually see him at the end of the encounter, kicking some bodies off of himself and cleaning the blood off his sword. And I really like to see that. It shows that he's not the most competent guy ever. Obviously, that's for Torshen and Sherida. They are our protagonists. But this guy manages to find a nuanced balance between being a bit of a stuffed shirt and a bit of a good soldier. And honestly, from what I've read, that's typical of officers. They are a bit of a stuffed shirt and they are a bit of a good soldier. So I like to see that even though he's this secondary background character, there's enough nuance to him that you can he looks like a real person rather than set dressing that is there to make the main characters look good. That is a skill that is difficult to develop. My one piece of critique for this story is there is a dream sequence in here, and there's nothing wrong with having a dream sequence in and of itself, but it does not appear to tie into the main story yet. And it happens. This story is broken into 5 parts, and the dream sequence, I believe, is part 3 or part 2. Let me double check. I want to say part 2, actually. Yeah, it's part 2 of 5. And it does not tie into the main story in any way, shape, or form here in this chunk. So we have part 1 broken into 5, you could call them chapters. Chapter 2 is this dream sequence that feels very disconnected from everything else. And, of course, I haven't read part 2. I suspect that the dream sequence will tie into the rest of the story somewhere in part 2. But, Anvil is a quarterly magazine, and I may not remember that dream sequence when part 2 rolls around. I would have, and in all fairness, this may not have been written as a part 1 and part 2, in which case it was intended that you would get the entire story together and you would have that tie-in later on. It may have been better as you are trying to revise the story for publication to move the dream sequence later into the story, possibly have it tie into some kind of a cliffhanger that's going to be fresh in our mind in part 2, especially because, the ending of this story is perfectly serviceable. It does kind of establish where we're leaving off and kind of the dangers we can expect in part 2, but it's not a particularly compelling ending to the story. There's no strong drive to get to part 2. I think maybe moving the nightmare to the middle so it creates something of a cliffhanger may have worked better. But at the same time, I doubt, again, this was written as a 2-parter, and there are time constraints as you're working on these stories and trying to get them submitted. So maybe I imagine Paul and Dragoon submitted it intending it all to be published at one time, and it had to be broken into parts. There is an art to serializing a story that a lot could be done from that point of view to make the Night of Cold Hunger better. But if it's true, as I strongly suspect, that it was not intended to be serialized, I can't really hold that against the author. So, it's kind of tricky. I just think that due to the editorial goals of Anvil magazine, this story may not be served the best by the way it's being published. And that's unfortunate because I like what the story is doing and I like what Anvil is doing. I just feel they're kind of at cross purposes right now. Market of the Double Call by Heather Santo. This is an interesting little fantasy story. It is about a not really an apprentice, but a ward of a wizard by the name of Kala. The wizard is named Wolcott. Kala's mother knew Wolcott somehow. We never really know for sure. But Wolcott has been looking after Kala, but now he's fallen ill, and Kala has to look after him. It's a very simple, easily understood, and very compelling premise for a short story. The market of the double call is not at all what I was expecting. The call are a alien species that live on this world. I don't know if it's Earth or somewhere else. I don't think it's ever explicitly stated, but we are told that the double call come from a different planet. So it's a little fantasy, and it's a little science fantasy. There's some magic at work. There is a interesting relationship between Kala, her parents, Wolcott, and one of the double calls is also a major figure in the story. Name is escaping me. Mother Gray. There it is. At first, it looks like all of these characters are just kind of separate, and we're going to just talk to them because they have stuff we need. But as you work your way through the story, each of these 5 characters kind of slots in together very nicely to make a complete picture for each of these characters. I thought it was quite entertaining and well constructed to make a really sweet, simple story about taking care of the people who took care of you. And I don't really have a whole lot of notes to give it. And yeah, I would be very happy to see more of Kala's adventures if Miss Santo is intending to publish more. After that, we had the Iron Age media story prompts. When in Boston by K.M. Thomas and The Infinite Forest by Noah R. These are both fairly short stories. I'd say probably about 1,000 to 1,500 words. And they both revolve around a twist reveal. They're pretty interesting. Each twist is very different. In one case, you have a person who goes to this restaurant and is having these very illicit-looking meetings with people who then turn up dead. And he's a suspicious character. And as I was reading it, it reads very much like you're making a deal with the devil. And the twist ending is that it's very much the opposite. The strange figure who is making mysterious deals is actually a vampire hunter, and all the people he's dealing with are vampires. And it's a neat little subversion because he is putting vampires to rest who feel they have lived too long. And this is in addition to apparently hunting them just as a mercenary, and it's a bit of an interesting, unusual scenario. But I like the structure that he looks like he's making a sinister deal, and then it turns out that all the people he's dealing with are the sinister ones, and he's probably the only one making the world a better place at the end of the day. The Infinite Forest is the twist is very different. The entire story is a build up to the reveal that the forest the protagonist John finds himself in is actually a simulation, and John is not even a real person. He's an AI, and this forest is just a program that contains him. And it's pretty simple. This is the shorter of the 2 stories. I'd say this is closer to 1,000 words than 1,500. And it does a very good job of creating that sense of surreality as John is moving through the forest, and also gives you the sense that something is off about John because he knows all of these very specific numbers of steps he's taken and where he is in relation to them. So there's a lot of well-laid clues to the fact that John is not at all a normal person before the eventual reveal. Both very good stories, worth checking out because these are available for free on the Iron Age Media website. So if you're interested in reading through those in more detail and seeing all of the clever setup work that the authors do here, it's worth checking out. Throat Swallowed Down by Andrew Kozma is a very creepypasta-esque story. A journalist hears that the town of Brothers Ditch has just disappeared, goes there to try and get the story, and he finds the town has indeed disappeared. But as he looks into it, he finds himself getting deeper and deeper into a scenario that he is unlikely to enjoy or survive. And lo and behold, at the end, he doesn't. Neither one of those are things he has accomplished. It's very straightforward. If you like that kind of creepy story, urban legendy kind of a story, it's gonna be right up your alley. We have some reviews in here, as I've stated before. Reviewing reviews is entirely too meta for me, so they look like they're good reviews, and that's all I have to say about that. The Dreaded Song of Clow by Jason Larimore. This is a story about a gladiator, a slave gladiator who has always been a slave gladiator, and has gotten reached the status of champion, and they've written this song about him, and eventually he is going to be sent to fight the champion gladiator of another city. There's an interesting sub-theme here about predicting the future. Clow lives in a city that is ruled by witches who can throw bones and read the future. And they are trying to... the whole story is about trying to control the future. Whether it's through casting these bones or through prophesying this victory by the gladiator Clow, or Clow is just trying to survive. He's trying to control his own future by ensuring it continues. And at the end of it, Clow meets Pockley, I believe is how it's pronounced. I could be entirely wrong. But Pockley is the other gladiator he is destined to fight. And Pockley is interested in showing the folly of trying to maintain this unnatural control over circumstances, constantly just striving to enforce your will on the next moment, whether it's staying alive or controlling every element of fate. Pockley is showing us a different way to live, and he offers that to Clow at the end of the story. It's this is, to be perfectly honest, it's a little meta for me. You know, like the idea of making these songs to control people, and you know, telling stories or controlling fate through the reading of prophecies. These are not themes that tend to interest me very much, and I think for that reason, this story fell a little flat to me. The prose is quite good. Larimore has a good sense of writing action scenes. His character does not introspect very much, and your mileage is going to vary on that, I imagine. But I think it will be entertaining for people who like these really fast-moving action stories. But the themes of it, with this, you know, the prophecy and the control and you know, reputation and song and this kind of thing, it's not something I'm personally really into. Some stories have kind of interested me with the way they work those elements in. It's not always something that grabs me. And usually I'm grabbed more because I have a strong, I feel a strong resonance with the protagonist and the particular reputation that he's trying to grapple with, which is not the case with Clow. And if you're looking for, again, the fast-paced action story, I can definitely recommend it to you. If you're looking for a good story about the way people deal with reputations or prophecies, I don't think the Dreaded Song of Clow tackles those themes particularly deftly. But you know, depending on what you're looking for, it can still be your story. So that is the contents of Anvil number 4. A broad array of kinds of stories in genres, in thematic elements. I particularly did enjoy the Market of the Double Call and Homefront, because these are stories that they present adventures for different kinds of characters than just the typical, 20s to 40s action adventure protagonist. And while I have no problem, in fact, I greatly enjoy the 20 to 40s, action adventure protagonist. Variety is the spice of life, and I did enjoy seeing a couple more of these different kinds of stories peppered through there. So hopefully we continue to see great work coming out in Anvil magazine. If you enjoy short fiction, if you enjoy action and adventure, I think that Anvil is probably one of the best places to get that fix on a regular basis. I know there are other people, working in the same area. Raconteur Press has a very broad variety of short story collections coming out as well, but they all tend to be focused on a single genre or a single theme. And Anvil magazine is just a great grab bag of a little bit of everything. And if I'm not gonna read deeply into a single story, then a broad variety of stories is what I prefer to see. So, Anvil, very good stuff, very good variety. If that's what you're looking for, definitely check it out. And I know that we have at least up to volume 6 slated to come out. I'm looking forward to seeing all of those as well. If you've read the magazine, let me know what your favorite story was down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit. And I'll talk to you later.